Joining me now is Chief Bill Denke of the IACP Indian Country Law Enforcement Section. Chief, thanks for joining us today. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. Honored to be here.
Over the past decade, there have been considerable changes and growth for the tribal law enforcement agencies. What have been some of the most impactful that you've seen?
First of all, absolutely. There has been a lot of change, good change in the last decade. I think most of that comes out of the Tribal Law and Order Act, which was signed into law by the President back in 2010. Very robust piece of legislation, probably the largest piece of legislation to address tribal justice issues in modern history. A lot of provisions in there from expanding tribal courts' authority to enhance sentencing for violent offenders, to clarifying the BIA's Bureau of Indian Affairs Office of Justice Services program that allows tribal officers to be commissioned as special federal officers while working on the reservations, access for tribal law enforcement officers to federal criminal justice databases. With all that being said, though, I think what's really pushed things along is a much more effective partnership with our federal agencies we work with, much more effective communication, coordination, and addressing issues. Currently, the Department of Justice rolled out a very important project called the Tribal Access Program, which allows tribal law enforcement agencies access to those very important federal criminal information systems, from the hardware to the software, ensuring connectivity and actually covering the cost.
What would you say is the or some of the most challenging issues facing Indian country today?
Jurisdiction will always be a challenge. Nowhere else in the country does law enforcement have to worry about the status or the racial or ethnic status of the victim or the offender and the status of the land you're on when that crime's perpetrated. So it makes it very unique. Tribal officers just have the inherent authority of tribal law to be enforced. They can't enforce criminal laws, state laws, or federal laws on non-Indians unless they enter into agreements or memorandums of understanding with local, state, or federal agencies. Along with that, one of probably the most important issue and challenge is funding. We still have tribal officers, single officer response to calls like domestic violence with their backup 45, 50 minutes away.
And why is that?
Just the funding isn't there, and it's not just for the tribes. I'm sure the BIA, if they were in here speaking, would say the same thing, that they could use a lot more money, to assist those tribal programs, or where they provide direct service on behalf of the tribes to put even more BIA police officers in the field.
Tell me about the importance of the IACP law enforcement section for the tribal law enforcement leaders working together. How does that work, and what kind of cooperation do you have?
Well, first of all, it's the only national organization representing tribal law enforcement leadership. We have over 100 active members right now, and what's important about this, it's not just tribal police executives that are active members, but it's our federal partners like the BIA, it's state partners, and even local partners that make up that body.
How is the section working to address challenges within the law enforcement of Indian country?
I think first of all, we don't hide from training. We understand even though at executive level of law enforcement officers, we need that critical training on pressing and emergency or emerging issues we're dealing with. Additionally, we try to advocate our current priorities of not just within IACP, but with our partners, especially through advisory boards, special commissions, either with the federal government or with even in our own respective states and local governments.
Anything else we should know?
That this section doesn't work in a vacuum, and often I think tribal law enforcement gets looked that way. They're on a reservation working. And the crime, the criminals don't recognize tribal boundaries. We all have to be working together, and even within the IACP with the other sections and committees, it's real important. We all know what we're all doing.
Chief Bill Denke, thank you very much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.